It's 3 a.m. and it's dark. Your room only illuminated by the screen light of your...
Insert playback device here.
On it, yet another YouTuber is trying to start their video essay off by telling you an immersive intro story. Disappointed that it's a dumb meta joke? You click away. I'm kidding! I'm gonna talk about your favorite video games. Darkwood, Stalker, Pathologic. Regardless of how much you love or hate each of these games, and some more that I'll mention down the line, have something worthwhile in common. And no, it's not their geography either. It's a narrative focus they share that guides many of the design decisions shaping each individual experience. Dissecting how each game serves and subverts this mutual storytelling method will Viagorize your enjoyment of the game, shield you from the evil of bad takes, and also allow you to design your own games better. And I mean that in a more literal sense than you might think. I'll be giving you a game system outline based on the principles of this mysterious narrative dildo. No, it's not a video game. Yes, it's a tabletop RPG. No, you shouldn't fucking click away because the same shit applies to both. And yes, I know I'm super persuasive, but thank you for saying so anyway. To answer that, we first have to go through a bunch of arbitrary but informative wrong assumptions, cause it's my video and God speaks through me. So, not unlike a shitload of other games, things start at a very familiar place. Keep some juice in your tubes so you can keep experiencing the rest of the game. Obviously, playing longer isn't the only incentive they provide for you to want to do that. At least not all the time. And the inclusion of health bars on their own isn't much of a notable commonality anyway. But you know what is? How fucking difficult each game or even its community and modders make that task. Suspect 1. High difficulty. While one can argue that often it's more of an illusion than actual difficulty, the idea of high stakes is undeniably bulging through these. From friendly suggestions to gatekeeping attempts to straight up misinformation, the communities are obsessed with it. And for at least 2 of the games, the devs have directly addressed its prominence too. You have big steamy logs of fans drooling over the idea that these games are hardcore real game gamer pants. You know them, you've heard them. They're your local gamerologist, claiming that the difficulty is there to hammer more tension into your experience and make it a real challenge. But since these games are way more than just sphincter tightening exercises, I'd argue that that's just the tiny baby amount of what difficultedness actually does. More often than not, it's not a sport. There is no gamer god in the sky rewarding only true gamer suffering, and the only thing that beating the challenges of these games can bring you is still the experience of the game itself. In these games, what lurks around the corner, its grunts, looks, and movements, are all masterfully designed to strike fear into your kidneys anyway. And while its mechanical measure of killy can help or hinder that, it's primarily not there to make you feel accomplished for beating the challenge. Such things, in fact, can also become jarringly distracting prompts for faster gamer reflexes, and the devs know that too and in fact want to avoid that. Unlike a lot of the fanbase bullies, when the devs recommend untempered difficulty, their concern is you missing out on something much more important. Something that ties directly into another commonality between the 3. Their sandbox approach to storytelling. Suspect 2. Sandbox elements. These games are purposefully filled with gameplay variables that can be poked through many holes and with many dicks. Or at least they fool you into thinking so. And in this context, the death, the harms, the hardships, the difficulty is there to make you question your choices and approach. Struggling to keep your HP may incentivize you to better your aim, but the most important thing it does here is make sure you question why and how an anomalous entity is hurting you, in what way, so you can avoid that through understanding it. Here, the difficulty may incentivize you not to aim at all. Starving is intense, sure, and it can make you feel more accomplished when you finally eat. But the real point here is that the faster your hunger bar drops, the more it demands that you explore your options. You dumpster dive, it's not enough. You steal, consequences drill through. You kill, it's not sustainable and it makes things worse. So you organically discover an entire bartering system out of necessity. It's still not enough. So you try to rest more and stay away from danger. Oh, but now you're missing time not only to save loved ones, but to make sense of the plot and why everything's so harsh anyway. Why is logic failing me? I hope at the end it's worth it and it wasn't all there to just fucking fuck with me. Without the looming difficulty, that is a meaningful spiral you may never go down, girl. You might still grotesque yourself from the grotesque of the forest, but you might not pay as much attention to how exactly they grotesculate, and you might not resort to the options that really express the concepts of the game. You may not feel the need to engage with the mundanely immersive day-to-day prep needed for survival in the zone. You may be one to contemplate how to walk through or around a bunch of leaves, but most only feel the need to do that if it's a minefield. So do we finally have it, Eve? Was that it? You dragged us all this way just to prove that these games are open world? And where's New Vegas, by the way? Where's Minecraft? Where's Pong? Why have you not gotten naked yet? Halt! This commonality too is just another video formatting ploy. I mean, a clue to get us closer. So these games give us sandboxes and then elevate stakes to keep us moving and add weight to when we're not. Blah. And does every punishing game with a bunch of freedom really capture the magic they emanate? The gaming industry's garbage habit of replicating these games' mechanics for the sake of mechanics themselves proves us otherwise. What really binds these games is that they chose to express themselves through anomalous worlds and managed to bring such worlds to life through the interactions between their mechanics. As we'll faceplant into shortly, these games' concepts as works of art are deeply concerned with the relationship of oneself with the world around them. As storytelling tools, Anomalous Worlds seduce us away from the presumptions that would numb us to such concepts. The sandbox mechanics just happen to be a commonly suitable way of portioning such worlds' intricacies for player consumption. And so by the end, the difficulty is just the world demanding to be heard. And I'm not saying that the devs of any of these games constructed the final work of art forward direction of how this video is claiming to reverse engineer it. I'm not saying they first came up with a concept or philosophy, then decided it could be expressed through an anomalous world, and then decided the game mechanics to successfully simulate it. Anything can inspire anything, but no matter the method of their conception, good works of art usually come with a coherence and layered maturity to how their different components interact with one another. In the case of this video, I'm arguing it comes from each game's ability to unite and refine their parts in innovative ways around their idea of an anomalous world. In doing so, they show us the potential the game medium has for works of art expressed in such a way. Give me proof, Steve! Waste more of my time explaining how that relates to each game! Put your sexy mouth where my filthy money is! Stalker surely wasn't a cautionary tale about that time when S.T.A.L.K.E.R was a megalomaniac, or a shallow hero, or a historical monument. It wasn't really about him defeating the authoritarian combination of Yuris either. Cause really, did any of that plot do jack shit? By the end, there's the belief that the zone is expanding, and the plot of the games only really justifies you being there and exploring. So I don't think I'm saying anything controversial here when I say that most of what Stalker expresses well is besides what we traditionally consider plot. As a piece of art, whether the devs intended for it at first or not, Stalker ended up being about survival and adaptation to a world, the reality of which is uncontestable. Being a stalker is just like being an animal in an ecosystem you didn't get to choose. Emissions are storms, anomalies, guns and loot are food, and you watch out for predators and become a better hunter yourself while escaping one and seeking the other. No reproduction or offspring though, sadly. Such as life in the zone, and the game mechanics let you enjoy and immerse yourself in the tedious precautions needed not to die in its familiminal world. That's a liminal space with an extra plus on familiarity. When you look at mods for the game, you can clearly see this being how it's consumed by most of the community too. While sandbox elements and that realistic damage mod that you added are parts of the experience, the fact that Stalker simulates an alien food chain for your fresh go at survival is a much more telling detail when it comes to understanding how and why it works, compared to just glorifying the separate mechanics that resulted from it. While I highly doubt it was the first game to do anything like this, the game transcended its traditional plot and became a popular blueprint for immersive survival experiences. The influence it had on both game chefs and game gobblers shows in fans of its legacy, even trying to turn games with superficially similar aesthetics into a similar experience too. Darkwood, on the other hand, ties its plots into the mechanics of your survival in a way that forces you into questioning the very nature of adaptation. For you to adapt in this game, you're constantly doing things you barely understand and learning to act in ways that feel off. You basically level up by injecting yourself with a hallucinogenic substance you know nothing about. And the survival perks you gain from it very obviously start to drag your character away from what you as the player would consider human. Your abilities more and more resemble the creatures you're fighting. The difficulty here leads you to be uneasy, and the only escape routes it gives you are ways to be unlike yourself in order to find comfort in your newly found world. Adaptation in Darkwood often doesn't make you feel operator or in your element. In fact, it's supposed to make you worried about what the fuck you are becoming with its grotesque nature. All this thematic fingering wells up into an orgasmic climax of an ending, where you either choose the ultimate comfort of becoming one with your environment, now as snuggly to you as your bed, or you rise against its suppressive demands for change and pay the price. Without the anomalous world and its goals shaping them, the sandbox elements wouldn't have such depth and direction to them, the level up system would have absolutely nothing to invoke, and your perks would be random power-ups with no personality. New Vegas, however, recontextualizes what you need to adapt to in its entirety. It immerses you into a world where human values have already conquered the chaos of the non-human world. And I know some of you are freaking out right now. Look at this red scorpion stinger up my ass, Eve. Does this look like victory over nature to you? Yes, actually. Because almost every danger in this masterpiece is presented as a clear result of humanity failing to adapt to itself. All non-human dangers you now have to face are a byproduct of war. The good old humanly and humane force we all know and love. Not only that, but the chaos it left behind serves to remind you of the very human goal of forming a state. Something you see all the incredibly well-written in-game factions attempting to do in their own way. A fun little detail about this is also how often human interactions and cooperation can directly warn you about or aid you in not finding yourself on the shit end of a Cazador or Deathclaw. You go around the Mojave not to unlock the mystery of nature, but that of human politics. Be it with guns, words, explosives, or words about guns and explosives, you're an able courier, delivering your very own impactful message to humanity, in hopes that it's not on yet another nuclear fallout crash course. We're the crafters of the world that the rest of us have to adapt to or be left behind by. So if we are to survive ourselves, there's nothing left to change but us. Pathologic then barges in to break everything down again, putting you in a series of roles that are either by themselves or the worlds around them, expected to bring order. Order to where? An anomalous world where logic and absurdity coexist in practicality. Progress and tradition wrestle over the present, and ideals, dreams, and reality have intermingling but equal material existence. Does that bring more questions than answers? Well, you're lucky I'm not a pathologic NPC. If other games use what you know about your own world to teach you new things and shock you about their own, you'll feel that Pathologic uses your expectation of how games teach you about their worlds to piss in your mouth. And I mean that in the same pleasurable way I talk about water sports in any other context as well. Adaptation in Pathologic on its own wouldn't have been difficult if you didn't feel the immense need to juggle it against the task of understanding and realigning the world too. And you're forced to question everything about that path while treading it. The game even dismantles all the ways you feel ownership of, attachment to, or even immersion into the world it's given you. By the end, you may only be left the same reason to play as you are left to keep wanting to live. Okay, Eve, as weird as it is that you constantly talk as the audience, you've convinced us. But how do we apply anything to anything? Well, if your game's best expressed through an anomalous world, I've created a system that can be a great outline for how each bit of math, mechanics, or rules can actually express a world. It's meant for a game master trying to create and host a tabletop RPG experience. But as you'll see with my video game examples while I teach you each bit, the two overlap quite a lot. S.T.A.L.K.E.R's first step to making a game is about basic narrative cycles. I've already wasted a whole video on narrative cycles, but just for you, I'll simplify, puppy. Basically, when you imagine your game being played, the sequence of moods or minigames you picture the player going through are narrative cycles. The cycles through which the narrative of your game is expressed. For example, you can break loads of TTRPGs down into roleplay, combat, puzzle. Or for non-RPG video games, story, combat, puzzle. If you're an experienced gamer, especially with older games, you can probably name a whole bunch that are linear experiences cycling between solving puzzles, fighting loads of enemies, and then getting fed a bit of story. You probably also remember how boring it was when the puzzles were jarringly unrelated to the game world, when the fights had zero nuance, and when both were incredibly predictable and communicated nothing. Because all that, of course, was just reserved for cutscenes. Now that, my parasocial bitches, is when tropes and cliches of what an entertaining game should be distract from your ideas, setting new examples for what games can be. That same old triad of roleplay, combat, puzzle, for example, can be a whole lot more creative and expressive when streamlined for the right goal. New Vegas allows you to solve almost every problem through a bunch of gameplay types of your choosing, and you get to see the different sides of the same characters, levels, groups, and events through your different decisions and means of solving problems. Gunning people down, sneakily finding your way, or convincing them to do what you want may still be versions of those three narrative cycles, but in this context, they cycle creatively. Which of these minigames you engage with is a game of its own for you to play. They stop being a linear set of cheap treats and instead become immersive implements through which you become you in a world and then see the consequences of who you are. Not only that, but now your character's reliance on what they're good at and how that guides some of their views, actions, and politics actually becomes a valid story in the mechanics of the game too. By honing the cycles of your game, you can do shit much more creative than that too. Things fitting for your world. There are so many other ways to break narrative cycles down too. You can break a game like Binding of Isaac down into what challenges it presents players with, and how those challenges can intermingle and affect one another to form a nearly endless game, which Edmund has noted to have been one of his core goals for that game. You can break a game like Franbow down, thematically even, where the gory shades of trauma and the bright fairy tales of optimism and dissociation are the most important voices of a narrative working together, and each can separately make use of the same minigames and challenges to interact with you. So breaking the experience down into narrative cycles allows you to refine each part around your goal as a whole. S.T.A.L.K.E.R's starting template for this, purely as something to think about before it's refined into your vision, is one that splits your anomalous world into two parts: exploration and reflection. What the fuck is this abstract bullshit you're pulling again, Eve? Listen. It's literally like offense and defense. Exploration is when the players are traversing an anomalous world in some proactive sense, and reflection is the opposite, when the world or story explores the player by imposing its anomalies or forces onto the player, more commonly putting them in a reactive mindset. Now, they sound extremely similar outside of who takes the first step, I know, but they're concepts that can inspire and evolve into very interesting things as polar opposites. You could imagine the former being like daytime, when you're exploring the world, learning its secrets, and scavenging for the items you need before harsher times come. And then you have the latter as the nighttime, which embodies those harsher times when the world tries to invade your house and overtake you. even if it's just as nightmares. So with that line of progression, you get Darkwood. But there's millions of other ways to be inspired by that same tension of offense versus defense, to points where it's completely unrecognizable. And so you refine your game again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and see what natural narrative cycles it's formed at that point. Exploration sections template for Soil, for example, is presented as a game in which your players traverse a gridded map. It can be like this, like this, like this, or like this, or certain freeform formats, based on how it makes sense for you to portion and relate the different bits of experience together. Each coordinate can have an encounter, filled with appropriate minigames and interactions, and can excite or scare the players about the other coordinates and communicate something about the work as a whole. If it's a video game, you program the different encounters in. If it's a tabletop RPG, you write scenarios and prepare to present them to the players for each bit. Reflection sections in this context can then be players deciding to stop and rest with different encounters now coming to them. It could be randomly generated weather events they have no control over, with harshnesses they have to react to. It can be a routine change to compulsory defensive gameplay, like nighttime in Darkwood. It could be a much harder minigame or situation that only comes up if they fuck up and get overwhelmed by the world. It can even be a short time of absolute silence for players themselves to just get to reflect on what went down in the other section. The map representing the exploration doesn't even have to be a map of locations either. It can be a representation of any set of interconnected experiences that make your game. It could be the many potions that the player can make. As an alchemist trapped under the castle by authorities, during the exploration section, you experiment with ingredients and reach discoveries that may give you hints to other results. More ingredients are brought to you during the reflection section of the game, where you get to question the different ranks that brought them to you and request other things for the next time. Those same ranks obviously have you trapped there for a reason and have demands that influence your exploration section decisions. Together, those parts simulate a world you only get to explore through second or third-hand knowledge. You then harness its truths and power through experiments, and decide what findings you actually let on outside to this world that you never got to see for yourself. Anyway, the point is that exploration and reflection can take any personalized form and frame the poles of your world. So now that we know how to create our broad game systems, let's talk about how you frame them against one another. You already know that it's important to also decide and prepare some coherent and expressive format to how you cycle between whatever parts you chose. But it's also important how seamlessly or purposefully disjointedly they transition into one another. And while there are endless ways to do either, one strong tool for both is game mechanics and rules that are there for all narrative cycles, but may interact either slightly or drastically differently in the different parts. The template for such a system in Soil comes in the form of basic player indicators. These are basically like health bars, but you use it in creative ways that match your world and gameplay. That alchemist game we just made, for example, could have meters of how pleased the different ranks in charge of you are, and how full each of those meters is can greatly change how their subordinates interact with you, if at all. And this doesn't mean you're even presenting these to the player as bars or numbers. Regardless of the alchemist game, Soil's simple examples are health, power, and morale. The idea is that health indicates physical presence in the world, power demonstrates agency and ability, and morale usually represents control over intricacies of the self. Any or all of these can be allowed or disallowed to influence one another, can be used in extremely unconventional ways, can evolve into something else completely, can have many more added, or can all be removed altogether. There are many more templates in Soil about how each of these can be expanded into player stats, armor systems, damage types, stamina, regen rate, and all that crap. But talking about that or any other mechanic here would be a waste of fucking time. So we already have our alchemist game expressed through two parts, when the world gives us stuff and asks for shit, and when we then proactively parse through the partial truths and choose what we want to send out, trying not to get executed and replaced and still staying true to our moral compass. During all of this, we have the 3 reputation bars that are GM or CPU tracks. And they are shown to the players only through the effects they cause, such as rewards, punishments, good or bad behavior towards the player. If too many go too low, we have a higher chance of being executed. But that's one of the least important parts of it. What really matters is that players need to learn about the complex politics between these 3 families and what good or bad things each can do to them. And all those bars can change meaning in an instant too, based on how replaceable we are as an alchemist. From a simple HP system, we just squeezed out an immersive mechanic that, if we don't fuck up on other levels, gonna make our players incredibly invested in the politics and inner workings of the world. The takeaway is that these simple meters, in and of themselves, can be an example of how any mechanic can be a powerful method of communication. They show how different aspects and entities of an anomalous world will affect a player character at every given time. Does taking mushrooms randomly enhance these meters in some way? I'm talking about Mario, what are you thinking about? The gloriously pathetic amounts of hunger regained by the first bits of food in Pathologic are actually a perfect example of this communication. One that is framed by everything else in the game leading up to that point as well. You might pump your creativity into multiplayer battle royale, ragdoll physics, and crafting, but the mindset still remains the same. Interactivity and the actual mechanics in games are still vastly unexplored, and by thinking the right way, you put yourself right at the frontier. Now, a lot of you probably have already clicked away when it was dark, but I have one more thing to add to your anomalous goal. Because tabletop RPGs as a medium have a few more slaps that your face has to prepare for. Now, for the bulk of the community, the culture of consuming tabletop RPGs as actual works of art isn't quite there yet. And this specifically can cause many problems. 1. Tabletop RPGs as they are now rely heavily on tropes. So unless your game specifically makes use of that or somehow takes that into account, you need to very clearly communicate to your players and ask them to abandon such presumptions to the best of their ability. Because otherwise, the norm would be for them to tie whatever you're describing in-game to the closest story or trope as players, so that they can accurately be characters in your world. 2. Player agency in tabletop RPGs is a much more sensitive topic than it is in video games. A lot of you lovely fucks telling your stories through Anomalous Worlds are hoping to tackle topics about how the world and its inhabitants are constantly changing one another and forcing one another's hands. This usually means that your players have to be prepared for the core of their character to constantly come under fiery inquisition by the world and its events. So before you build up your Game Master screen, make Mexico pay for it, and then blame your players for being snowflakes when you do weird shit to their characters, understand that TTRPGs are usually built around much more intimacy between character and player. This is actually good news because they can be even more immersed in your world, but you first gotta learn not to be an asshole and actually let them in on your plans, or very clearly warn them so that they know what they're in for. 3. Tabletop RPGs are run by Game Masters, and Game Masters have a habit of not being as faceless as computer programs. And there's one very particular side effect of the Game Master's personhood that I want to warn you about. Video games use nasty dirty tricks to make their worlds seem free or fair, when they really aren't, or they wouldn't be as good if they were. Such little nasties can be just as necessary in tabletop RPGs from time to time. But do be aware that because you're a person running the game, you may be accused of fooling people or being dishonest. Examples of this can be fudging dice rolls or changing planned events based on new player decision. So make sure your players have accepted the terms and conditions of trusting that everything you do is for the integrity of the experience. So quick recap. These 4 are examples of how games are a great medium for Anomalous Worlds. You can tap into this otherwise unexplored potential by analyzing and refining your game the right way. There are some extra stuff to watch out for with TTRPGs, and that's it. Time to plug the rest of my shit now. Guess who's got their plug ready? Give me Patreon money so I can make my Alchemist game. Watch my audience interactive tabletop RPG show to the left. Watch my weirder video essays to the right. Subscribe to my channel on the lower left for a detailed video on soil in the future. Check my Twitch and watch the garbage gaming content on the lower right. And give me a back rub when you're done.